Welcome to 3ABN. It's our privilege today, Yvonne Lewis and myself, to be here with Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Ben, thanks for inviting us to your lovely home.
Glad to be here.
It's a blessing to be here. You live in a beautiful place in a beautiful area of the world. But I tell everybody, no, not everyone gets to live in Southern Illinois like us, you know, and enjoy all the seasons.
Especially in the wintertime, right?
Yeah, in the wintertime. But Florida's okay. Florida's all right, too. And we just wanted to talk to you today about, very informal for our folks at home, life, religion, and politics is what we're calling it.
Okay.
And so for some of the folks, I'm sure probably virtually everyone watching this program, if we'd have done this 2 years ago, some folk would have said, he looks familiar, but I don't know him. But I think today, Yvonne, probably everybody watching this says, I know who Dr. Ben Carson.
Oh yes,
right?
for sure.
Unfortunately, I've lost all anonymity.
Well, we wanted to talk about, first of all, we wanted to just start and get a look, for those who don't know, your background. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you were born and raised, and if you lived in a Christian home.
Yes, I grew up in Detroit. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. They both came from rural Tennessee, came from huge families. My mother had a terrible situation growing up. She could only cobble together at most a third-grade education, was shuffled from home to home. In an attempt to escape such an environment, got married at age 13.
Wow.
And she and my father moved to Detroit, and then years later she discovered that he was a bigamist. And that's what occasioned the divorce. But, you know, with such limited education, she didn't have many options, so we moved to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law, because we wouldn't have had a place otherwise. And they lived in a typical tenement, multi-family dwelling, rats and roaches, sirens, gangs, violence. But it was a roof over our head. And my mother worked extraordinarily hard. She refused to be a victim. And she would never allow us to be victims or to talk about being a victim. And after a couple of years, we were able to move back to Detroit, still to a dilapidated neighborhood, but at least she was independent at that point. And she would get up at 5 and leave the house at 5 in the morning, going to clean other people's houses. And she would go from job to job to job, get back after midnight.
Wow.
Sometimes we wouldn't even see her during the week, because we were still in bed when she left and we were in bed when she came back. So we were, latchkey kids. But, the problem for me, and my brother as well, is that we were terrible students.
Really?
And she just didn't know what to do, and she prayed to God to give her wisdom, and he gave it to her. We didn't think it was wise, but turning off the TV and making us read book and give her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. But all of her friends were so critical of her, and they said, you can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would say, Mother, they're right, but we had to do it anyway. And as I started reading about people, particularly people of great accomplishment, I began to understand that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you.
Wow.
It's not somebody else.
Okay.
It's not the environment. And that's what people around were always saying. This person's keeping you down. This is keeping you down. So at that point, I just really didn't have time to listen to them. I was so busy reading and empowering myself. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class.
I read your book, Gifted Hands, and that's one of the things that impressed me so much about it, is that at one point, if you asked the other students, who's the dumbest kid in this class, they would have said you.
Exactly.
And then
Really?
after you started doing all this studying and you became an expert in certain things because you focused on certain things, then they asked, who's the smartest kid in the class? And it was you.
Right.
So it showed that, and because of Dare to Dream, I'm so into this whole idea of your circumstances don't determine your destiny. They don't have to.
Right.
Your mom got super involved with you and had you both reading and writing.
Right.
So you learned how to do both.
Exactly.
And that really, I think, catapulted you into a standard of excellence.
And we need to recognize that we are made in the image of God. And God is no dummy. And he's given us what we need to excel. All we have to do is be willing to develop it. And it really doesn't matter what your circumstances are. What matters is what your mindset is. You can take somebody who has the proper mindset and you can take everything from them and put them in the middle of a ghetto somewhere. And I guarantee you, in a year's time, they're going to be on top because they have the right mindset. You take somebody who has the wrong mindset and you dust them off and put them in a three-piece suit, give them a fancy title and position and a fancy office, guess where they're going to be in a year?
Back. Back.
So,
Okay.
So the question is, how does one, if all your circumstances seem to be against you, you know, you're in a really bad school, you're in a really bad neighborhood, your resources are super limited, how does one develop a good mindset under those circumstances?
Well, the way I developed it is by reading and transporting myself to another place. I remember some of the things I read that had a huge impact on me. There was a book called Up From Slavery. It was the autobiography of Booker T. Washington.
Okay.
Born a slave. It was illegal for slaves to read. And yet he taught himself to read, read everything he could get his hands on, and became an advisor to 2 presidents. I mean, that's an astonishing story.
It is.
And then the story of Joseph in the Bible had a profound effect on me. Sold into slavery by his own brothers. Did he feel sorry for himself? He didn't say, bummer, my own brothers sold me into slavery. He said, if I'm going to be a slave, I'll be the best slave there is. Next thing you know, he's overseeing Potiphar's household, the captain of the Egyptian guard.
Wow.
And then Potiphar's wife sees him and, you know, tries to seduce him, but he's a man of principle. And where does he wind up? In jail. Now, obviously, Potiphar didn't believe his wife, or he would have had him executed, but he had to save face for her. So anyway, he's in jail. And he says, he didn't say, bummer. Here I am living up to all the principles and standards, and I end up in jail. He says, no. If I'm going to be a prisoner, I'll be the best prisoner there is. Next thing you know, he's got a responsible position in the prison.
Wow.
Then he's interpreting dreams, and the next thing you know, he's the governor of Egypt, the most powerful nation in the world.
Yeah.
And what that said to me is, it doesn't matter where you are or where you start from. But if you do what is right, you connect yourself to the Lord, and you do the best that you can, everything will be okay.
And in your case, you were raised without a father.
Correct.
But your mother, she had Christian values, Christian principles. Tell us a little about that.
Well, you know, my mother, she always knew about God, but it was actually when she was in the hospital to give birth to me that she met a woman, a Bible worker, who was a Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay.
And she really took to it, and she just loved the message, and she became a devout Seventh-day Adventist Christian at that point. So that's how we grew up.
You were raised in church?
Raised in the church. Now, I will admit that you know, I probably had some misperceptions. As a youngster. You know, I saw God as a old man with a long white beard and a powerful telescope, looking at everything you ever did and writing it down so that on the day of judgment, everybody would find out what you did.
Wow.
And, you know, over the course of time, I came to realize that's just the opposite of who God is. You know, He loves us so much, He gave His only begotten Son to die for our sins, to bear the burdens that we should have borne. And that degree of love it's even hard now, after a long Christian walk, to comprehend how much he actually loves us.
Absolutely. You get out of high school. Now, I can talk about this, he and I are the same age, but you're in the 60s and say early 70s, you're going to college, a young black man, and you come from if we can call it, I don't know if you call it inner city at least,
yes,
or single parent, but you didn't decide just to become a doctor. You wanted to be a brain surgeon. Now, I'm a layman, but it seemed like to me, one of the smartest people on earth are probably brain surgeons. Yeah. So that wasn't like, I'll just take general doctoring, I'll do whatever. But you set your goal, which would seem to me extremely high, coming from your background.
Yeah, well, my background, one of the things it did was instill in me a desire to be a doctor. It was the mission stories in Sabbath school. They frequently featured missionary doctors, and I wanted to do that until I was 13, and then I decided I'd rather be a psychiatrist because it seemed like a glamorous life on television. But when I got into medical school, I asked myself, what are you really, really good at? Because I believe God gives everybody special gifts and talents. And I started analyzing my life, and I realized I had a tremendous amount of eye-hand coordination.
Okay.
And the ability to think in 3 dimensions. And I was a very careful person, never knocked things over and said, oops. And I loved to dissect things. And I said, you would be a terrific brain surgeon. Particularly since I'd spent all those years studying the brain, thinking I was going to be a psychiatrist. And a lot of people said that was a very strange thing. Because at that time, there had only ever been 8 black neurosurgeons in the world. But I didn't worry about that because, when God equips you to do something, He doesn't look at your color.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
So, He gave me the talent, and, I took to it like a duck to water. It was just obviously the perfect thing for me. And, by the time I was 33 years old, I was chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins.
That's amazing. What I wanted to ask you, Dr. Ben, is a lot of folk, and I don't know, even raised in the church and going through some of our universities, when they get out of medical school, sometimes their faith, instead of being strengthened in a creator God, it somehow seems to be destroyed because medical science says, no, you're not created.
Right.
Now, you studied the brain, so you've studied the human body. Did this ever cause you to doubt there's a creator God, or did it enforce your beliefs?
No, for me, it was always reinforcing, and I try to think logically. The, quote, scientific community says that something came from nothing. There was nothing, then suddenly there was something. And then even more astonishingly, that something then exploded. And everything came into perfect order.
Wow.
Our solar system is so precise. We can predict 70 years hence when a comet is coming. I mean, that's incredible precision.
It's amazing.
Our Earth's spinning on its axis at exactly the right tilt, the right distance from the sun. I mean, and that all just happened. Now, these same scientists, quote scientists, believe in the laws of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is entropy, which indicates that things tend to naturally move toward a state of disorganization. So you're saying there's a Big Bang and everything becomes perfectly organized. Now, that requires a lot of faith. A lot more faith than I have. And then you say, there's these biochemicals. Now, I don't know where they came from, but anyway, there's all these promiscuous biochemicals that got together, and somehow they formed a living cell. Now, Darwin thought that the cell itself was the basic element. He had no idea how complex a cell is. But even if you just give them, okay, there's a cell. Now, so this cell now divides and becomes a non-complex organism, and then that non-complex organism becomes a more complex organism, and on it goes, and then you have people. Give me a break, you know. and the problem is that they say, well, it just goes from one stage to another, but the intermediate stages from one organism to another are missing. And no one can find them. Where did they go? And they cannot explain that. And what I say to them is, you know, you're entitled to believe that. It requires more faith than I have. But that's where you choose to put your faith. I choose to put my faith in God.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. We're going to move on to, we're doing a little life, religion, and politics, but I know she has, as a mother, she has some questions about the family.
I do. First of all, I know our viewers probably want to know, how did you meet Candy?
Well, we both grew up in Detroit, but we had to go to college, to Yale, to meet each other.
Ah, okay.
And it turns out that the church that I was attending, you know, needed an organist. And I knew from my initial meeting of her that she was a musician. So I said, would you like to come to our church?
Was that an excuse?
No, it wasn't. No, it was legitimate. It was legitimate.
Okay.
It turned out that her organ skills were not what they should be. She's an excellent violinist. So,
Okay.
And she sings well. So she actually ended up joining the choir.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
And then subsequently, you know, started studying and, you know, was baptized. And we've been married now for 41 years.
Wow.
Wow, wow.
Wonderful.
And so you have 2 children?
We have 3 sons.
3 sons.
My 3 sons. Everybody was always saying, when are you going to have a girl? And I would always say, we're going to have 3 girls when they get married. And they all got married in 2011. All 3
really?
of them.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
And so now I have 3 grandchildren as well.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
And
Which son is most like you?
well, my oldest son, Murray, looks exactly like me. Spitting image.
Really?
Same
His
personality,
okay.
everything. Our second son looks like my wife. Same kind of personality also. And our third son, we're not exactly sure what happened there. No, he's a great young man. He's an accountant, CPA. Our middle son is an entrepreneur, mergers and acquisitions, and owns all kinds of businesses. And our first son is an engineer.
Oh, wonderful.
Did you raise them like you were raised, with reading and not television and that kind of thing?
Yes, and it paid off in all of their cases. You know, these days, if you can raise children who are independent and self-sufficient and doing well in the world and raising their own children, that's a great victory.
For sure, for sure. What would you say was one of the greatest challenges that you had in parenting as they were growing up?
Well, both my wife and I grew up poor, and it's tempting to spoil your children and to make sure that, you know, they never want for anything. But we knew the consequences of that kind of lifestyle. We'd seen, you know, some of the children of friends who were very wealthy and what had happened to them. It was not a pretty picture. So we put hardships in our kids' lives.
Okay.
To make sure that they knew how to overcome and how to fend for themselves.
What kind of hardships, if you don't mind?
Well, never giving them anything, always making them earn it.
Okay.
And always making them responsible for anything that happened in their lives that wasn't good, so that they learn not to blame other people for their problems. And it's worked out very well. You know, one of our sons, the entrepreneur, you know, he does extremely well financially, and people say, how did you get so good with money? And he said, well, when I was growing up, my parents would never give me any, so I had to learn how to get it.
just read something about, I won't give his name, but supposedly the richest man in the world went to a restaurant, and so when he left a $5 tip. The waiter was so shocked, he knew this guy is so wealthy, and he said, I'm sorry, is there something wrong? And he said, well, your daughter comes in here, she gave me a $500 tip. And he said, well, I can answer that for you. My daughter's father is extremely wealthy, but my father wasn't. So
he's going by his father.
He's going by his father, so.
Yeah, well, you know, I was talking to a very successful television producer, and his father came over here from Italy as an immigrant, penniless, worked very hard, built a publishing empire, became a very wealthy man.
Wow.
So when the guy was ready to go to college, his father said, you go to college, but you have to work, pay your way through. I'm not paying for your college. He was so angry with his father because he knew his father was a multimillionaire and he wouldn't pay for his college. But you know, he worked very hard. It came time for his graduation. He didn't even want his father to come to his graduation.
Oh, wow.
But his father came and he gave him a check for the entire amount.
Oh.
And he said, I knew that you would work hard if you had to work for it yourself.
Oh, great. That's wonderful, great.
It is. When your boys were growing up, spiritually, was it difficult to help to shape their spirituality, given the fact that they are Dr. Ben Carson's sons?
Well, you know, they always grew up in the limelight. There's no question about that. But we regularly had worship together as a family. We would read passages from the Bible and talk about what is the meaning of those things. And I think those kinds of things kept them all very solidly grounded. You know, I think it maybe created some difficulty for, I know my oldest son, when he went off to Yale, you know, some of the young ladies gave him a difficult time because he believed in, you know, marriage and no sex until you're married, and you know, a very traditional young man. And today that makes you a real weirdo.
It's amazing how things have changed so much over the past several years, you know. At one point, if you read the Bible, people applauded that. Now, if you try to live by the Bible, they
then you're
look
some
at you
kind of
as,
a bigot.
you're a bigot or you're weird.
Right.
And so it's really, it's interesting trying to bring these principles into this time.
Well, when you take God out of your life, something else has to replace him. And that something else is never going to be as good. And you see depravity begin to substitute. And people who, even people who are, quote, Christians, are not able to understand that, you know, certain things that are happening in our society are not consistent with Christianity. You know, like killing babies. You know, the Bible speaks out strongly against homosexuality. And yet, you see a lot of, quote, Christians, you know, grasping and supporting individuals and parties that embrace that kind of philosophy.
Wow, what a great segue to the political side now. We want to talk about politics. When did Ben Carson, brain surgeon, getting to a point in his life where he says, man, I can free now, I can retire, I've done well enough, I can do anything I want to do in life. Did you wake up one morning and say, I think I want to run for president of the United States?
No, quite the opposite. I had really no intention of getting into the political arena. And then I was asked to speak at the 2013 National Prayer Breakfast, at which time I said, Lord, what are you up to? I said, because I didn't think that anybody ever did it twice. I had done it in 1997.
Oh, okay.
And I said, Lord, you must be up to something. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what I was supposed to say. And I certainly didn't realize anybody ever did it twice, and I discovered that one person had, and that was Billy Graham.
Okay.
And I really knew he was up to something. But I didn't know what I was supposed to say until the morning of the prayer breakfast. Then it was crystal clear. And obviously it just resonated with millions of people. And people started clamoring and saying, you should run for president. And I said, give me a break. You know, I wasn't really thinking about that seriously. Every place I went, I was doing a lot of public speaking. There were people with placards and run, Ben, run. I said, what is this? What is it with these people? And I said, if you just keep ignoring them, it'll go away.
But it didn't.
But it didn't. It kept growing. Pretty soon I was getting petitions, 5,000 a week. You got to run.
Wow.
I had hundreds of thousands. I could barely get in my office. There's so many boxes of petitions. And I finally said, Lord, are you trying to tell me something? And I said, you know, all the pundits say that someone like you couldn't possibly run a national campaign. You don't have a Rolodex. You're not connected with anybody. You don't have a source of funding. It's impossible. Don't even think about it. All of which comforted me to hear that, by the way. But I said, Lord, if you want me to do it, you'll have to overcome those issues. You have to open the door. And I said, if you open the door, I'll walk through it. And if you close the door, I'll sit down. And he obviously opened the door. You know, the money just started flowing like crazy with us doing nothing. It was just coming like crazy. Even when I finally dropped out, you know, we had to plead with people to stop sending us money.
Wow.
But we put together an organization very hastily, which served the purpose. But, you know, there were some problems with it. I had to reorganize it. What I reorganized to was actually very good, very effective. But, you know, I had an opportunity to meet so many people and get so many perspectives and find out so much about politics in this nation, which unfortunately is extraordinarily corrupt, both on the Democrat and the Republican side, extraordinarily corrupt. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to change it. You shouldn't do what you can do to try to fix it, because what became increasingly clear to me is that we were compromising the future for our children, our grandchildren, everybody who came behind them with our national debt, which is just growing like crazy. $19 trillion next year, $20 trillion the year after that, $21 trillion. And, you know, these numbers roll off of people's tongue, but most people have no idea what we're talking about with that kind of money. I mean, if you tried to pay back $19 trillion at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, it would take you more than 5,000 years.
Oh, wow.
So we're not just talking about the next generation, we're talking about generations as far as the eye can see. Thomas Jefferson said it's immoral to borrow from the next generation. And that's not even the worst part. The fiscal gap. Most people don't know what that is, but that's the unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all the government agencies and sub-agencies, everything that we owe, versus what we have coming back in through taxes and other revenue sources, which should be substantial, by the way. This country owns more than $150 trillion in assets. So if we ran it like a business, that would generate a lot of money for us. We wouldn't have these deficits, but we don't run it like a business. A business run like our country would be bankrupt in a week. But at any rate, we just keep borrowing. But anyway, what we take in and what we owe should be about the same. When it's not, it's a gap. And you bring it forward to today's dollars, it's called a fiscal gap. It's at over $200 trillion. So if magically someone paid off our national debt, everybody would be out dancing in the street, we wouldn't even be close to out of the woods. Wow. And those things worry me. You know, education worries me tremendously. You know, right now we have an all-voluntary military, but between the ages of 17 and 24, 71% of the people who apply are rejected. 71%. Wow. Why? Mental, physical, or educational reasons. Educational being by far the biggest category. People unable to pass a basic exam basic math and communication skills, and they're all at least high school graduates. So, you know, we are failing our people at a time when our society is becoming more complex, technologically savvy. We are failing our populace.
Wow.
At the same time, we have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's inmates.
Wow.
So there are some real issues that we have got to deal with.
Absolutely.
Because these are self-destructive issues.
Absolutely.
So you couldn't stand by. You said, okay, the Lord must be open a door. But I have to ask you a question. I watched your prayer breakfast. I wanted to know, maybe you don't want to tell us publicly, but I really wanted to know, I watched President Obama's face during the interview when the camera went on to him. What did he say to you after the prayer breakfast, or did he say anything?
No, he came over and he said, thank you for coming. He didn't say he enjoyed the speech, but he was very, very kind and gracious.
Very kind. Okay, good. I didn't know, but when I saw that, I said, well, something's going on. So you decided, okay, the people decided really that you run for president. Everybody said you don't have a chance. You didn't know if you had a chance, but you did know that God was leading.
Correct.
Do you still feel like today you're no longer in the race? Do you still feel like God put you there, or it was just you got on this emotional roller coaster, and though you mean well, do you have any, maybe I shouldn't have done this? No,
I recognize that God's plans are much more complex than ours. As it says in Isaiah 55, his ways are higher than our ways. He obviously put me there for a reason. There are relationships that have been developed, influence that has been gained, all of which can still be used to try to save this country from itself.
And I grew up in southern Illinois, West Frankfort, Illinois. It's a basically white area, white county. There's few minorities. But when you ran for president, you were running. My doctor, my attorneys, my chiropractor, my dentist, people that I met in town, virtually everyone that I knew, and we would go to eat at restaurants, and people would know that we knew you. They'd say, oh, he's a Seventh-day Adventist, you are.
Yeah.
You know, man, we love Ben Carson. We're voting for him. He's got our 100%. But I was surprised that when we travel and we go to different churches, that a lot of the black churches we went to, people didn't seem to be so excited.
Right.
They were very excited when President Obama ran.
Right.
Almost any church you go to, now I'm talking very direct here to our folks at home, but I may never get this chance again. So I was surprised because Obama, it seemed like 95, 98% of all blacks voted for him when he ran. Ben Carson's running, and I see most everybody that I know was white was voting for him, but honestly, a number of blacks wasn't excited about it and said, well, you know, he's a Christian, he shouldn't run for these were other Christians, he shouldn't run for political office, so we're not that excited. Can I ask you a blunt question? Why do you think that is and was?
Because I was running as a Republican.
Okay.
And also because, you know, I'm not a fan of President Obama.
Okay.
Or the policies, the socialist type policies or progressive policies. You know, I'm very pro-life. I believe in traditional marriage, which doesn't mean that I'm a homophobe by any stretch of the imagination. I believe everybody has equal rights, but I don't think anybody gets extra rights. They don't get to redefine and change everything for everybody else. And you see how these progressive ideologies want to impose themselves on everyone else rather than just let people live and let live. And they're not able to understand the concept of tolerance. They think everybody should be tolerant of them, but they need not be tolerant of anybody who disagrees with them. It's pretty hypocritical. But in terms of black people in this country, you know, this is a very complex history that has gone on for a long period of time. Back in the days of slavery, the blacks in the house were told they were better than the ones in the yards, which were better than the ones in the fields. And they kept this friction going all the time because the slave owners knew that if they combined their strength, they would probably not be able to keep them enslaved. So that was essential. And then even after slavery ended, you know, they tried to, you know, the color of your skin, you know, you're light-skinned, so you're better than the dark. And it just goes on and on. Today, you know, if this person is not a Democrat and doesn't follow the Democrat line, then they're an Uncle Tom, and they're against you, and you should hate them. You should never support anything they do. It's the same thing because they know that if people like me begin to get that message of self-empowerment out, and, you know, the importance of education and how people, you know, in the black community, there's over $1 trillion in assets. And if they learn how to turn the dollar over in their own community a couple of times before sending it out, you create enormous wealth. That's what the Jews did. That's what the Koreans did. A lot of people did. It would be unbelievable. And then you learn how to reach down and pull the next guy along. You don't have to be dependent on the government. But the Democrats have craftily gotten people to believe that you need all this stuff and that I'm going to take care of you and you'll be all right. And don't listen to those horrible people over there, though. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people have bought that. And, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight against it, continue to educate. And I'm finding actually a lot of black people are starting to listen and are starting to analyze, and they're saying, you know, 50 years of Democratic rule in Detroit or in Baltimore, where has it gotten us? Everything is so much worse. And the people who promise all this stuff, they're doing just fine. But how are you doing? Not so great, you know?
Well, see, and as you enumerate these different principles that you're talking about, I don't think you would get a lot of disagreement from the black community as far as the legitimacy of we need to be able to hold the Democratic Party accountable, the Republican Party accountable, so that if it's a very interesting concept.
Make them compete for you.
For the vote.
Yes, absolutely.
I think if there was some acknowledgement of the power of the vote and how if you come together as a bloc, then you can impact your community.
Absolutely.
But there has been this traditional feeling of Republicans have not been inclusive, have not invited black people into the ranks, so to speak.
I think they've been very poor at communicating the acceptance and the alternative programs for empowerment. And that's something that's going to change during this election cycle. I'm going to make sure it does.
All right. All right.
How are you holding up? Because still yet, I can turn on the television several times a week and I see somebody interviewing Dr. Ben Carson. I mean, there's still a lot of responsibility. People are going to be asking questions. Now, I have to say, Yvonne and I, we're not Republicans or Democrats. We consider ourselves independent. But when we vote, we're going to vote for who we think is right and on the side of right. But I'm having trouble, and I want you to talk to us about this. You referred to it a little bit. And so based on what I've just said, as a Christian, I have a hard time seeing how Christians can vote. And again, I don't care what party it is, but same-sex marriage is anti-Bible.
Right.
Killing anyone, especially innocent babies, I would think, is anti-Bible. But yet there are a tremendous amount of Christians who say, well, you can't go by, you know, nobody's perfect. I'm a Democrat, I'm still voting for that. But it seems like to me that I have a hard time. Can you explain that to me?
I have a hard time understanding, quite frankly, how someone who embraces Christian principles can at the same time embrace, you know, things that the Bible clearly speaks out against. There's no question about that. And the fact of the matter is, you know, there are no perfect people. I will readily agree to that. And some people say, well, this one's just as bad as that one. They're both bad, so it really doesn't matter. I don't agree with that. I think the choices here are similar to a cut on your finger versus having both of your legs chopped off. You know, you don't want either one, but one's a whole lot worse than the other. And you know, you need you need to be able to analyze those things. You look at particularly the progressive movement, and you see how they're trying to move Christianity out, and almost anything else is okay. But don't you ever talk about Jesus Christ and Christianity. You know, you're a bigot, you're all this. And, you know, any political party that espouses that would be something from which Christians should really distance themselves.
Wow. I have to ask you, because to me, there's a number of things that are shocking, and I've been around a long time, and I'm hard to be shocked. Transgender thing, this bathroom deal. Talk to me about how does Dr. Ben Carson feel about that?
Well, you know, it's interesting because your biology tells you whether you're a man or a woman. I mean, this is scientifically unquestionable, and it has been for thousands of years. But now you have some people who come along and says, well, yeah, I know your genetics say that, and all your physical characteristics say that, but it's really what you think. So, isn't that the same as you getting up tomorrow morning and saying, I feel like I'm Afghanistan. I identify with Afghani people, and that's who I am. I know I don't look like it. Genetically, I don't fit the profile, but that's who I am. And if you say I'm not, you're racist.
Absolutely. Or in the morning, I get up and I go to the hospital. I make my way in, and I put on my gloves and my hat and my gown, and I say, you know what? I really feel like I'm a brain surgeon. I think I want to operate this morning, because in my mind, I really feel like I'm a smart guy, and I've never had any experience. But I really feel like I could do this. I know Dr. Ben Carson, he's a friend of mine. He can do it, so why can't I? And then expect people to let me in to operate without them saying, hold it, get out of here, you're not going to do it.
Well, the sad thing is, I don't think people recognize how confusing this is to the children. And
how dangerous.
We need to be asking the question, should there be a difference? Is there a difference between men and women? Or are they really just the same, and we should obliterate any evidence of any difference? And that means men and women can shower together, they can do anything they want together. See, all of that completely denies biology, science, and nature. Because there is a difference.
Absolutely.
And vive la différence.
Yeah.
And we all disappear if there's no difference.
Absolutely. Men and women, if they choose to shower together, that's fine. But we're talking about imposing, say, my youngest daughter, Trinity, who's here, she's 16, and she goes into a restroom. We travel a lot, and maybe there's a guy that says, hey, I like women, but I'm going to dress up like a woman, so I want to go in the bathrooms. I am not going to be happy about that. She's not. That's imposing. You talk about, well, wait a minute, he should have the right to do. What about the rights of those who say no? And what about when the girl, maybe it's a little girl 9 years old, 12 years old?
And it's so simple to resolve. You have your man's room, your ladies' room, and you have other room.
Yeah. But didn't this start because of the Supreme Court with same-sex marriage, saying that basically any two people, now all of a sudden there's not a separation. You can do basically
which is the reason that the founders said that civil issues should be handled locally. Not at the federal level. Because the problem with handling this kind of issue at the federal level is that you've got people who are not voted on, telling all the citizens how they must live. You need to have people over whom the citizens have jurisdiction saying that, because they will act in a much more responsible way.
And then the citizens can say, we don't want this.
That's right.
Or we do want it.
Exactly.
Either way. Yeah. But by framing this as a civil rights issue, that's how this whole thing has gotten so distorted.
Right.
Once you create that paradigm, then everything else, kind of, you're a bigot if you don't go along with it.
Just because
it just changes the whole thing.
Yeah, just because they say it's a civil rights issue doesn't mean that it is.
Exactly.
And it's completely different than what was going on with segregation and Jim Crow and all the racism that used to characterize things in this nation. And yet they try to tie everything to that. And because everybody knows how wrong that was, so if we can tie this to it, then it makes that wrong also.
It's that whole framework, the whole framing thing.
Before the interview is over, and we'll make sure that we give, if Hillary Clinton or anyone wants to do an interview with us, we'll be happy to hear from her too. But we have to talk about Donald Trump. You can't turn on the news anywhere without hearing about Donald Trump. I don't care what channel, and it goes on for hours and hours a day. Ben Carson decided, okay, and 16 others, I think, said, you know what, we're stopping our campaign. Some say we're not going to support Donald. Some say we are, and others is we're not sure. We're waiting. But Donald Trump, I saw you with Donald Trump at a meeting somewhere, and he says, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Ben Carson is now supporting me. Well, tell us a little bit what's going through your mind and how you, I know you don't have to justify, but for our viewers at home, saying, how can this man support Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, you know, I've gotten to know him, and he's a very, very decent person. He's got thousands of employees. You're going to have a real hard time finding one that doesn't like him. He treats people so fairly. You look at how his kids turned out. That tells you a great deal about a man. They are very cool, hardworking, respectful, just great, great young people. But also, you have to be pragmatic. If you're dealing with a situation where you have one party that espouses government control of your life from cradle to grave, you know, killing babies, obliteration of any of the morals that are suggested in the Bible, and you have another that looks to fiscal responsibility, a strong military, personal responsibility. I'm going to want that second one to win. I'm not going to want the other one to win. So I'm going to look for the person.
Somebody's going to win. One of the two.
Right.
It's not like you can shut your eyes and say,
right.
okay.
You just can't stick your head in the sand and say, you know, I have no responsibility here. So I did that analysis, and it was very apparent which way I needed to go. But then I had to say, who should I support? Well, by that time, there's only, what, 3 people left. Kasich had no chance of winning except through a brokered convention, which would completely splinter the party, and there would be no possibility of winning anything. Cruz had the ability to attract only very conservative people, would never attract people across the lines. Trump, on the other hand, was bringing in record numbers of people. And at the same time, the pollsters, the pundits were all saying, well, he'll be slaughtered by Hillary. This was their narrative because they wanted the party to reject him. But the fact of the matter is, already the polls show them pretty much even, and I think as time goes on, you're going to see Trump pulling ahead quite a bit because the things that he's talking about are relevant, not just to Republicans, but to Democrats. And I think as people begin to recognize that this is America, this is a country that is of, for, and by the people, and that we don't have to be ashamed of the heritage that allowed this nation to go from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world in record time. And that our Constitution is important, including the First Amendment, freedom of religion, which Donald Trump believes in strongly. So I think you're going to see a pretty significant shift going on here. And the other thing that's going to happen, and I'm going to make sure it does, is that the Republican platform and what they advocate will be relevant to the downtrodden in our society.
Oh, good.
That we provide ladders of opportunity, not handouts that make people dependent, but ladders of opportunity that allow people through their God-given talents and hard work to become successful.
Just the way you did.
That's what we have to do.
Do you see the Republican Party addressing the mass incarceration of black males and females?
Absolutely, they will address that. But one of the ways to address that is early on to begin to focus on schools and education and educational choice. Now, so many young people, particularly in inner cities, are just corralled into these failing schools. And they're not getting the kinds of opportunities that many other people get.
Correct.
And they find themselves very early on going down that path of self-destruction. What we have to recognize as a nation is that we only have 330 million people. China has 1.4 billion. India has 1.1 billion. We have to develop all of our people. We can't afford to throw away any of them. We can't have 20+% of people not graduating from high school.
Right.
So this becomes an issue of our national strength and our national issue, and we need to address it that way.
Good. That's great. Who are your political heroes?
Well, historically, George Washington was one of them.
Why?
Because he had so much faith in God. You know, a lot of the historians who try to rewrite history say, oh, he was a deist. And Franklin and all these people, they were deists. They didn't believe that God acted actively in our lives. All you have to do is go back and read their writings. And you will see that they were not deists. And that's why in our book, America the Beautiful, Candy and I put a lot of the quotes from our founders in there. You can see that no one would say those things unless they had strong faith in God. And, you know, Washington had so many episodes where it was so clear that there was divine intervention. You know, when he was down to his last battalion and they were trapped on Long Island and General Howe was closing in on 3 sides and the Navy on the 4th side, and it looked impossible. And meteorological records demonstrate that that evening a dense, mysterious fog fell on the area, which allowed him and his men to escape. And it stayed there even after the sun came up until they were all gone. I mean, there are multiple records of just incredible things happening. God loves this country, and we are making a big mistake by trying to get rid of him.
For sure.
Okay, I know our time is running down and you've got other interviews to go to, but I want to talk a little bit about your latest books. And a friend of mine told me that he stood in line in Chattanooga, Tennessee for an hour and a half to get you to sign a book. He wanted it, but I know there's got to be better ways than standing in line for an hour and a half. Tell us a little about your books and maybe how we can get those.
It's been pretty amazing when we have these book tours, and people tell me, I've been in line for 8 hours. I came here while it's still dark this morning. Waiting. And I mean, there would be literally thousands of people in line. But, you know, our latest book is called You Have a Brain.
Okay.
A teen's guide to think big, but it's really for more than even teens. But to really get them to start thinking rather than just mindlessly going along with the pop culture and what people say you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to do. And interestingly, you know, recently there was an article in the Pittsburgh Gazette about one of the judges there who has decided that for youthful offenders, he's going to assign them to read that book and then come back and give him a report on it. And so far, the results have been spectacular.
Wow.
They're really, having life-altering effect for these young people, because in many cases, no one has really talked to them about what's right and what's wrong, and what are the pathways of success, and what are the consequences of this action versus that action, and the whole concept of think big. Each one of those letters means something. The T for talent, the H for honesty, the I for insight, the N for nice, the K for knowledge, the B for books, the second I for in-depth learning, and the G for God. And if you put those elements in your life, I guarantee you, you're going to be successful.
Isn't that wonderful?
That is so good, because our people need to know that there is an out. You don't have to just follow the crowd.
And you
can think
don't
big.
have to be a victim. That was my mother's theme in life. You're not a victim. Unless you think you're a victim, then you're one.
Wow, absolutely incredible. Maybe lastly, where do you see yourself going and fitting in with, you've already said you have some hopes and dreams of what you would like to see happening. Do you see yourself as part of, should Trump win, the administration? Do you see yourself, regardless of continuing in the political arena?
Well, I see myself as a citizen statesman who will continue to speak out vigorously about the things that are going on in our country, to be a commentator and a writer about them, working with the administration as an ear to how the people feel about things, and how to do things in a commonsensical way. But I don't want to be a government official.
Fair enough, fair enough. Okay, and one other thing I just thought about, some of our folks are saying, of course, now people around the world who never, had heard of Seventh-day Adventists or knew very little about them because of Dr. Ben Carson, and the media attention you've gotten, know about Seventh-day Adventists. But I've had some people who are members of the church say, well, how can he be a good Seventh-day Adventist Christian and do politics or go to meetings or speak on the Sabbath? Do you want to answer that?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of times when I would go to a rally and there'd be thousands of people there on the Sabbath, things that I talk to them about are the very same things that I frequently would say from the pulpit. Doing good, trying to save a nation, trying to save people's future, trying to bring some decency and some morality back. I think those are the things that God calls upon us to do. And also, my wife and I on the Sabbath, we have our computers with us, and we pull up the church services.
That's
we
right.
look at them. There's certain things that we don't do on the Sabbath.
And hopefully on 3ABN you're watching that some, because I know you have it on your app, so
That's
it's on
exactly
your
right.
phone app. So.
And Dare to Dream. I have to put in a plug.
Oh yeah,
You got it.
absolutely on Dare to Dream. But I've told people, honestly, a pastor works on Sabbath.
That's the day they work the hardest.
To work the hardest is on Sabbath, so it's lawful to do good.
And as a surgeon, I saved many lives on the Sabbath. I think it would probably have been a dereliction of duty not to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you have any last questions?
I don't. I just feel like this has really been enlightening, and I thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you all for what you do.
It's a blessing.
God bless you, and we are going to, people say, I wish you luck. I don't do that. There's no song that says country song. If I didn't have bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. We don't believe in luck, but we're going to pray God's richest blessings. He's used you. When he was hanging on the cross, you were on his mind. He could look down that stream of time and see that you would be willing to stand up in the closing moments of Earth's history to be a representative of the kingdom of God. Yes. Not saying you're perfect, people that you're working with perfect. None of us are. Only the Lord.
And if we connect ourselves to the perfect one, it gives us enormous power.
Absolutely. So we'll be praying for you. God bless you for what you do.
Thank you.
And pray that God will give you many more years of vigor and energy that you seem to have as you continue to go forward. literally lifting up Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Amen.